Howdy, welcome to Chapter 15, Special Senses, the Eye, Part 2, and there will be 3 videos on the eye. It's pretty complicated. Okay, so this is a cartoon of the eyeball. We're going to look at the internal cavities and chambers and fluids, oh my, for the eyeball. So this circle is showing you the location of the anterior cavity containing aqueous humor. If there's an anterior cavity, there has to be a posterior cavity, and there is. This whole bulk of the eyeball back here is the posterior cavity. The anterior cavity contains a fluid called aqueous humor, and it can also contains, this cavity also contains 2 chambers. So here's the anterior chamber of the anterior cavity, and then this is the posterior chamber of the anterior cavity. The internal cavity, both the anterior and posterior cavity, are filled with fluids called humors. I think humors is Greek for fluid. The lens and the suspensory ligaments, so here's the lens, and then these little white lines here, those are suspensory ligaments. They separate the anterior and posterior cavities. So here's a cartoon showing all the parts that we've talked about so far, but we're going to be focusing on the anterior cavity with aqueous humor and the posterior cavity with vitreous humor. So here's our cartoon. Well, let's look at this part first. So the light rays come into the eyeball, and they have to get through the fluids of the anterior cavity and the fluids of the posterior cavity before they can get back here to the cells of the retina. So then let's look at this cartoon up top. Here's the anterior cavity. This is all anterior cavity. This part is the anterior chamber, and then back here is the posterior chamber of the anterior cavity. It's kind of weird. But anyway, the posterior cavity is all back here. So this is all, and it's kind of cut off in the cartoon, but this would all be posterior cavity. It transmits light back to the retina. It supports the posterior surface of the lens. So this is the posterior surface of the lens, and you can see it abuts with the posterior cavity. It also helps hold the pressure in that fluid in the posterior cavity helps hold the retina in place. The anterior cavity has 2 chambers. We talked about that. The anterior chamber is between the cornea and the iris. So here's the cornea, here's the iris, and between the cornea and the iris is the anterior chamber. And then the posterior chamber is between the iris and the suspensory ligaments. The anterior segment or cavity contains the aqueous humor. And aqueous humor is like kind of like your plasma, but it's continuously produced by the capillaries of the ciliary body. So here's the ciliary body. These little projections are projections of the ciliary body. So you're constantly making the aqueous humor, and you can see these arrows show you the direction that it flows. So the aqueous humor is made here from the capillaries of the ciliary body, and then it flows up, goes through the pupil of the eye, and then it flows into the anterior chamber, and then it drains here in this scleral venous sinus. It used to be called the Canal of Schlemm, but they're trying to get away from people's names. And this, you find this at the sclera corneal junction. So this is all cornea. Here's sclera. This is the junction of the cornea and the sclera. That's where you find the scleral venous sinuses. What does the aqueous humor do? It supplies nutrients like glucose, and it also supplies oxygen to cells that live in the lens, cells that live in the cornea, and also cells that live in the retina. You've probably heard of glaucoma. That's when your aqueous humor is not draining through the scleral venous sinuses properly, and you compress the retina and the optic nerve because of that buildup in fluid pressure. And this just shows a little bit more detail of on the cartoon we've been talking about. So here's the ciliary body. These processes are finger-like projections, ciliary processes. And then this is the ciliary muscle that when it contracts and relaxes will relax or make taut these suspensory ligaments, and they're attached to the lens. And the lens can either become fatter or more round or flatter. So the lens, now let's talk about the lens. It's biconvex. It's transparent, flexible, and avascular. So avascular means there's no blood vessels in it. But that aqueous humor can help supply what you need from the blood, which oxygen and glucose and other things, to those cells that live in the lens. You're going to change the shape of the lens for precise focusing of light on the retina. As you get older, the lens gets denser, it's even more convex, and it gets less elastic. And you can also get this condition called cataracts, which is clouding of the lens. You can also get cataracts if you have diabetes mellitus, if you're a heavy smoker, frequent exposure to intense sunlight. All right, so let's do a little physics primer here. Let's look at light. Maybe in your physical science classes, you've seen this Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Those are the colors that we can see in the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So this is what we can see. Humans can see this visible light. And the two types of cells in your retina that allow you to see light waves or light rays in general are cones and rods. Rods you use for vision in dim light, so shades of gray. That's what you use your rod cells for. And then the blue cones, green cones, and red cones they're cells in your retina that will detect all the different colors. Light is basically, comes in a wave. It's a packets of energy called photons. And then, like I said, the photoreceptors, rods and cones, will respond to different wavelengths of light. This is a photograph actually demonstrating refraction. So refraction defined is when light rays bend when passing from one transparent medium to another due to a change in speed. And also that refraction has to occur if you come in at an angle. So if I'm a light wave, I'm a light wave, I'm in the air, I'm traveling in the air, and now all of a sudden I hit the water. That's one medium, air, to another medium, that's water. Then I'm going to change my wavelength, and when that happens, you get this process called refraction, and what you see is the photograph. This straw looks like it's in two pieces. Light entering a new medium, so like from air, the new medium it entered would be water, at a 90-degree angle, does not bend. So if the light waves come straight in, you won't get refraction, and you won't see that. So this is focusing of 2 points of light. So you've got your point sources of light out here in the environment. The light comes in, goes through your lens. So this is your lens. Some of the light waves or rays get refracted to different focal points on your retina. And what happens is the image from the environment gets inverted. So it's upside down in reverse. So see this yellow square out here in the world, when you see it this way on your retina, look, it goes to the other side and goes from being on the bottom to the top. All right, so this is focusing light on the retina. So here's this letter R, that image, the light rays travel from the image, they go through the eyeball to the back to the retina, and the image, the letter R, gets inverted. So the pathway that the light rays travel upon entering the eye, the first thing that the light rays will hit is the cornea, then the aqueous humor, then they'll hit the light waves will hit the lens, then it will hit this all this purple stuff, the vitreous humor, and then finally it'll come back here to the neural layer of the retina with the photoreceptors, rods and cones in it. Where you get the most refraction or most bending of light is here at the cornea and at the lens. So that means that the lens, if you can control the lens shape, you can control how the light is bent going back to the retina. So a change in the lens curvature allows to fine focus an image. And the way you change the curvature of the lens is with these suspensory ligaments attached to the ciliary muscle. So this is a cartoon talking about focusing for distant vision. So this R is far away. The light rays from distant objects are nearly parallel, so it'd be represented by this line and this line. They need little refraction. The rays need little refraction when you're viewing something far away. And then there's this place called the far point of vision. That's the distance beyond which no change in lens shape is needed for focusing. So at about 20 feet, so if this is about 20 feet, if you go farther than 20 feet, you don't need to change your lens shape in order to view the object. When the lens is flat, that's when you can see far away. So to get the lens flat, the ciliary muscle is relaxed, but look, the suspensory ligaments are tight or taut. So that makes your lens flat. And this is just a cartoon that shows all the parts. And usually when you're trying to see far away, that's a sympathetic nervous system event. If you're focusing for close vision, so now look here, the R is really close to the eyeball, and you can see you're going to get a lot of refraction. So when you're focusing your lens for close vision, that's called accommodation. It's also called accommodation when you're trying to focus your lens for far vision. But in close vision, so you're trying to get your lens to the proper shape so that you can see this R. And if you're viewing the R up close, then you have to have a fatter lens or bulging lens in this case. So, and the way you get a bulging lens is the ciliary muscle here contracts, and then see how these suspensory ligaments now are slack, so they're not tight anymore. That allows the lens to bulge. And there's a condition called presbyopia. You lose this ability of accommodation, and the near point of vision is very short over age 50. And this is a cartoon with all the parts labeled. This is a cartoon, so it looks like you kind of take a frontal section through the eyeball, and then you look inside, and you can see this the ciliary muscle as a sphincter, and then these white lines are the suspensory ligaments. An emmetropic eye is a normal eye. That means, so if the rays of light are coming in, they go through all the parts of the eye they have to go through, and then they focus on this thing called a focal plane, which is at the back of the eyeball. That's good focus. That's an emmetropic eye. If you have a myopic eye, that means you're nearsighted. That means your eyeball is too long. And look what happens. You get the focusing of all those light rays. They converge here in the posterior chamber, and that's not good because they're supposed to all focus back here on the retina. But you can correct that with a concave lens, and it will move the focal point, so where all those light rays converge, further back. In contrast to being nearsighted, you can be farsighted. That means you have a hyperopic eye. That means your eyeball is too short. So look at what happens. The rays of light converge actually behind your eyeball. So you can fix that with a convex lens to get all those rays to converge along this focal plane where they're supposed to. There's also called a condition, astigmatism. You've probably heard of that. That means you have unequal curvatures in parts of your lens or your cornea, but you can correct that with laser.